What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Best Granic, the show hosted by Marcin, who is me, with our affiliates SKN, ZS, SKH. Today, we're going to be speaking a little bit more about a concept that we haven't spoken about, a sport that is way more popular than volleyball or Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which is running. And my guest today will be my former colleague, my good friend, and former D1 runner, Noah. Would you mind introducing yourself a little bit?
Thanks, Marcin. Yeah, it's good to be on the podcast. My name is Noah Van Riesema. I'm from the United States. I'm from the state of Michigan, and I ran track as a hurdler at Michigan State University. And like Marcin mentioned, we're good work colleagues, good friends, so I'm looking forward to being on the podcast.
Appreciate that quick intro. So, getting right into the subject, running. Don't know about other listeners on here, but when it comes to running, for me at least, I've tried it on the treadmill, I've tried it anywhere, and I just can't find the joy in it out of a sport. So, Noah, being raised in America and being surrounded by, the cultural aspect of playing baseball, football, or basketball, why did you choose running? Or how did you choose running?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, in the United States, there's lots of great sports that everyone plays. Track and field is often a secondary sport for people. So usually people will have a main sport in the fall season, like they'll play American football or they'll play soccer or volleyball. In the winter, basketball is really popular. In the spring, track is really popular, and a lot of people like to run track and field because it's a good supplement sport for their main sport, because you get to continue to be competitive, continue to run and condition yourself, which helps with all your other sports. So for me in high school, American football was my main sport. And then my secondary sport was track and field, and I would do that in the spring. But I just happened to have a lot of success with it and started to get looked at for universities and colleges. And as many people know, American football, you can definitely get a lot of injuries. There's a lot of tackling and hitting, and track and field, I think, was just better for my body, to compete at the college level. So I decided to do track and field when I went to university, and yeah, it was a great decision.
100%. I know that you know that I played volleyball, but little tidbit that you might have not known is that I also was thinking about playing football, but thank God I didn't because I have a very delicate spine, which I found out about at the age of 18. So I'm happy I didn't do it. But before we get into track, would you mind talking about football really quick? Obviously, we understand track being a supplementary sport for you, but what position did you play in football, and why did you choose football, considering all the injuries that you just mentioned that happen to athletes that go that route?
Yeah, so football is just really big in the town that I'm from. So I'm from a small town in Michigan called Chelsea, and there's just a lot of community support around it. For kids, you're about, you're playing, especially in high school, you're about, like I said, age 14 to 18, and there'd be like 5,000-6,000 people at our games, from the town coming to watch. So there's a lot of community support. And so it's just like a big community event. It was a lot of fun, and there's a lot of team camaraderie. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of injury risk, but it's just a great sport. It's there's a lot that goes into it. There's a big brotherhood in it. There's a lot of strategy in it. There's a lot of physicality in it. So it definitely is great for, I think, character building and sharpening, your mentality to compete. And as far as my position, I played a position called wide receiver. So my job was to catch the football. So my job was to run down the field, catch the ball that was passed to me from the quarterback, and then hopefully, run it in for a touchdown. And that paired, so it was a lot of, I had to beat defenders. I had to run past them and get myself open. And that paired really well with track and field because I could continue to work on my speed and my running form. So the position of wide receiver and, running track and running hurdles were a good combination for me.
Absolutely. And then I also forgot that the guests I've currently had have all been from Chicago itself. Could you talk a little bit more about Chelsea, that hometown feel? Could you talk about um, how a small city, has its sense of community built around football? Because for the Polish listeners that are listening right now, um, Chelsea, what was the population, if you mind me asking really quick?
Probably like 30,000 people.
Okay, so that's not a wioska, but that's a miasteczko for our Polish listeners, let's say. But you mentioned football almost acting like an identity to your community. Would you agree with that, or how would you define football in terms of what it meant to Chelsea?
Yeah, there's definitely a huge sense of identity in the United States around football, especially in like the Midwest, um, where I grew up. So yeah, the local football team, your high school team, people often you're representative of your community. You go play other cities in the area, and it's just something that if the team was doing really well. There's a lot of community pride around that, and then that also would extend out to the college level. So our universities also had football teams as well, which were very popular, and a lot of community pride revolved around the football team. So like Michigan State University, for example, you'd have usually 70, 80,000 people, every Saturday go and watch a game, with a bunch of, kids aged 18 to 22. So, yeah, there's just a lot of community pride that was around these young athletes. And yeah, I think it's a special thing. And we talked about the injury risk, and I think that's getting highlighted a lot more about, trying to make the game safer. But overall, there's tons of positives from American football. And I think it's a pretty unique thing, I think, to the United States, especially at the university level, how much pride and community there is around our sports teams.
Absolutely. And then before we dive deep into the track route, I know that you mentioned that you attended Michigan State University, but you mentioned Chelsea is close to Ann Arbor, which is um, the home city of the University of Michigan,
Yep.
which is considered, in my opinion, almost an ancient rivalry, in American universities, at least,
Yeah.
from one uni to the other. Um, Before we get into recruitment and whatnot, was there any individuals in Chelsea that were against you going to MSU compared to the University of Michigan, or how did that look?
No,
How
I
did,
don't really get that was what my college decision came down to. It was between Michigan State and the University of Michigan. And I really struggled to decide which one to go to. Both were great universities. I had family who went to both universities. I fell in love with both universities. So when I was recruited, the coaches from both the University of Michigan and Michigan State both offered me spots in the team, and it was a hard decision. In the end, I ended up coming down to Michigan State. I mean, I was really flipping coins. Like I was having a hard time deciding, but I just felt very at home at Michigan State, and that's where I decided to go.
Absolutely. I definitely want to dive back down that rabbit hole of the recruitment route. But before we do, let's just talk a little bit more about the comparison between playing your experience playing a team sport versus running, which in track and hurdles, I'm assuming you ran alone. You might have had somebody that again, don't blame me, don't kill the messenger. Don't I'm not experienced in running, but in hurdles, were you running alone or did you like pass a baton? How did that look for you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, because actually track and field, you're right. It's both an individual sport,
And a team
but
sport.
also it actually is a team sport too at the same time. So but it's definitely more. It feels way more individual than something like soccer, or basketball, or football. Um, where in a football game you can have a really good game and you can feel good about yourself, but the team loses, it doesn't mean as much. Versus track and field, the team can lose, but you can still feel pretty good. It's kind of the inverse where, football, you can have a good game, you feel good that you had a good game, but the team loses, you feel overall crappy. Track and field, it's more like, your team, they actually combine points from everyone at a track meet. So teams can actually win, but it feels way more individual because you're completely dependent on yourself. You're not relying on other people to have a good track meet. So yeah, it's really you versus you. It's all about getting your personal best. Um, we would call it PR, personal record. And yeah, so it's just you against the clock. And I think that's the unique thing about track is, um, you're always competing against yourself as much as you are. Usually you go into the race and you're competing against other people, but you really want to focus on yourself and running your race and kind of shutting out the noise. And um, it's a little bit different mentality versus I think other sports you have to kind of focus out more than other people. But in track you can really get in your own lane. And one of the things we would do that is one of the exercises we do before a race is you'd visualize the race. So you'd be going through your warm-ups and you'd kind of visualize yourself going around the turns, especially hurdling, going over each hurdle. um, how you would finish the race. And that was definitely a step up from high school. In high school, you just kind of went and ran. In college, you would actually make race plans, like how you plan to pace yourself. But yeah, you're very focused on your own individual performance, which is definitely a different mindset for sure.
And then that's actually a really great breakdown of the mentality when it came to your high school experience and collegiate experience in hurdling. But how would you compare that to football if you could, really quick? Because as a wide receiver, you're mainly doing a lot of running. Obviously, you're going to be off on the sidelines, but you're using quick bursts of energy constantly trying to get away from a defender in order to be open for your route to catch the ball. Long story short, I keep forgetting that we got to speak in easier terms here for people that don't watch football. But how would your mentality in running differ from your mentality in football? Because you're doing a lot of the same features that you do in running, besides the fact that you don't have a hurdle in front of you, you have a human in front of you that's trying to stop you at all costs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like in football. In football, you can kind of get into more of the flow of the game. It's a longer period of time. You're out in the field for a lot longer. There's lots of starts and stops. Versus track, which is really interesting, is like, sometimes I might go to a track meet and usually I'd have like 2 or 3 races, but there's been times where, I'd only have one race that day. Let's say I'm only running especially in college, I'm only running the 400-meter hurdles for this event. And so yeah, so your whole day is planned around this, like, you know, 60-second race. All the warming up and the traveling and all this. There's this huge buildup for a 60-second race. So there's actually a lot of anxiety that you feel because, in football you can make a mistake and there's the next play. You can make it up. In track, it's like it's this huge thing for this like one race. So there's a lot of anxiety I would always feel right before the gun goes off, the race starts. So it's kind of like managing that. I think trying to like build yourself up to peak at the right time is, and that's probably the biggest difference, versus with football. You had a whole game and you know, but track, you're really trying to like time, I'd really have to like, okay, I need at this, maybe, at 1 hour before the race, this is what I do. And 30 minutes before the race is what I do. And like, here's how I time when I go to the bathroom. And here's how I time, like when I do my warm ups. So I'm like properly warmed up. And when I do my, so there's a lot of focus on getting yourself just optimally primed for that exact time. And that can be a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety. You feel a lot of anxiety, especially in a big race. Versus, I think football, it was kind of like you feel a little bit of that nervous energy, but it was a little more of an excitement. And once you got into the game, you just got into the feel of the game. And I think, yeah, they were definitely different feelings for sure. But I guess the one similarity would be as a wide receiver, they would call a certain play, and you kind of knew the ball was probably going to come to you. They're probably going to throw you the ball, so you maybe had a little bit of anticipation energy. But I found for me that like usually once the play started or once the gun went off, if you did your training correctly, your brain just kind of shuts off and you just go do it. And I think that's the biggest thing with athletics, performing at a high level, is you practice and you go through things so many times that when the time to perform happens, you don't think. That's the key. It's like you're not thinking about anything. You just are reacting and you're in the moment. And I think that's what all great athletes do, is they're not really they're thinking, but they're not like using their prefrontal cortex. They're using their muscle memory, really. And I think that's just from the repetition and all the work that comes before the meet or before the game. And I think that's what a lot of all great athletes will say, is that you win the game in practice. You win the game in the summer conditioning. You don't just win the game the day of. It's all the work you put in. That's really what.
No, that's a beautiful breakdown. I mean, I'm gonna give you a quick compliment right here, but one of the reasons that I got drawn into our friendship was due to your in-depth analysis of any situation that you're in front of. So this just shows how deep you think about situations. So kudos to you. But as you mentioned, in football, just like I mean, again, volleyball is a completely different sport, but that's what I'm used to along with basketball. You have many opportunities that can become your moment. Because obviously, when you look at any situation, you have your highlights, you have, you know, those plays that are remembered throughout the game versus track where it's the moment. You only have a moment. I never understood that as an athlete because I never ran, but we're definitely going to get into the depth of that with you because you've had these experiences. So, with that breakdown, you there with me? I know that we're online right now, so you're pausing, but I want to know that you're hearing me.
I can hear you. Yeah, we cut out for a second, but I can hear you.
Perfect. You're giving me this glare because your camera cut out for a second where I didn't know if you're staring at me or if it just froze, long story short. But both football and running are known for their physical demands. What drew you into running specifically where you decided to progress your career in it, even though it has a singularity to it? I don't know if you enjoyed the ability to only count on yourself, or what was it? What was it that drew you into running?
Yeah, I think what drew me into running, I mean, like a lot of things in life, I think you get naturally drawn to something you're naturally talented at. So I think for me, it was probably a little bit of natural talent. And then you start to kind of build off of that from there, and initially my best event was high jump. And I really enjoyed high jump. And, but I started to get better at the hurdles. And, yeah, so I think for me, I think the hurdles were they really drew it to me because, there's the race aspect, but there's some skill to it as well. And I think that's what I liked. It was one of those events where you could hone it. It wasn't just your natural running ability. You could also hone in on your skill of, getting over the hurdle. And um, yeah, and I think one of the things I, benefit from was naturally having a taller guy, longer legs. That was helpful. But, I could become a better hurdler, which could help give me an edge. Because running is one of those sports that, as a sprinter, it's very sprinting is actually very, very genetic. So when you look at a lot of Olympic athletes, you'll see a lot of kids out there who are, like 17 or 18 years old running in the Olympics. And you have to work incredibly, incredibly hard. There's a lot of really talented kids, and they work really, really hard to get a second faster, or a tenth of a second faster, and really hone and get yourself to the edge. Very, very small margins. But to get to that level, there is a natural athleticism that you have to have. I would say it's probably like, for track, it's probably like 70%. For sprinting, it's probably 70% like genetic, 30% what you can work on top of that. I think distance running, you can have a lot more leeway in terms of your work ethic, having a bigger say. But what's great about running now is you can always get better than what you are. So whether you're a high school athlete, a college athlete, a professional athlete, it's you versus yourself. So wherever you're at, or you just like to run for your own enjoyment, and it's really popular in the United States. People do a lot of marathons and 5Ks and 10K running events. It's just fun to practice pushing yourself to be the best you can. And I think that's the core of the sport, is just like always trying to just improve yourself. And it feels good. You hit your own personal, that's what it really feels the best, more than winning, actually. You could lose a race, but you got your own personal best. You ran your fastest time, and you feel amazing about yourself, even though you lost the race, because it's really about yourself and watching yourself improve. So I think that's the cool thing about the sport, and it's why I continued it into college. Was I think I just enjoyed that competition aspect, and there's a team camaraderie too. You naturally get to meet people, you get to travel, to different meets, meet different people, as a community around it. So yeah, I think those two aspects are really enjoyable.
When you explain running to me this way, you make me want to hop on a treadmill and pretend like I have the motivation to run. And I wish I did, because I look at you, I look at individuals such as our friend Gianna, who prepared for half marathons, 5Ks, marathons, whatever you may call it. But I still don't understand it, because everybody talks about this great sense of accomplishment that they have from running the race. Do you have that feeling throughout your run, or do you have it afterwards? I'm curious, because in volleyball, I have, as in football, I have the ability to make multiple moments, versus any instance of running, it is your moment. It is that moment, like I mentioned.
I think it's really afterwards. Yeah, it's really afterwards you feel really good, because you have this pent up nervous energy before a race, and yeah, and then afterwards it's kind of like that, like, breathe out, and that release of all that energy, especially if you feel accomplished because you hit your goal. So for me, it's always the feeling after, like, after what that's what's kind of funny about it, is it's like, it's not the most, actually, for me, a track meet is really actually not the most enjoyable experience. It's actually, most of the time you're like kind of anxious, the whole way, because most of the time you're anticipating this moment, especially for sprinting, you're anticipating this race, and you kind of have this anxious energy all day, and then you finally do it, And even in the moment, it's really not it's not the most fun, because you're pushing your body really hard and it's tough and you're competing. But afterwards, you feel amazing it's like when your races are finally done, it's just like the best feeling ever. So it's kind of a weird sport like that, where like you're happiest when it's over. At least for me with like sprinting track and field. But yeah, like the point is you feel great after, you feel great, you hang out with your friends, team camaraderie. You feel it's the feeling of pride, you did a personal best. And so I think I'm focused more on like the sprint, like, being a sprinter and a track athlete. I think maybe Gianna would have something different to say about, running like a half marathon or something like that.
Have you ever run a half marathon or a marathon, 5K, whatever it may be?
No, I haven't. I'm not a big runner guy. I think the most I've ever ran is like 5 miles, which maybe like a 10 kilometers. But
So you're saying you're fast, but
I'm
you're
fast,
not big on the endurance.
but yeah, but there's such thing as like sprinting endurance too. So our workouts we would build sprinting endurance, not so like jogging endurance. But we'll talk about that later.
I didn't even think about it that way, but completely makes sense. Because if I'm using 100% of the gas in my tank, don't know how I'd be able to maintain, that level of exertion in whatever sport I'm doing. But before we get into it, like you mentioned, we're going to go into it a little bit later. I want to talk a little bit more about recruitment. So, you realized genetically you had a predisposition to um, make it into the collegiate route when it came to track. How did recruitment look in terms of track and field?
Yeah, so it really just started for me. I was recruited pretty late. It really just came down to coaches just seeing me at events. And the other thing too is like one thing about track and field, which is great, is that they take your time and they will post it. So there's an online website that actually tracks all the times of all the athletes in the state of Michigan. And I think every state has this. So coaches can just go and they can just see like, hey, here are the 10 fastest kids in the state of Michigan. Here are the 20 fastest kids in the state of Michigan. So coaches can see just like right off the board, like who all the fastest kids are. And they'll probably take that information and go watch them at a track meet. So that's what happened to me with both Michigan State and Michigan is I was at an event, and I think for the Michigan coach, he was actually coming to watch one of the kids I was competing with. And this kid was going to the University of Michigan. He had a scholarship, and I almost beat him. And he ended up kind of barely beating me at the end of the race. But he was like, okay, this kid is also really fast. Like, let's see if you'd be interested too. So I think it's really all about just, being seen in front of coaches. And there's actually something I didn't realize then, that if I was to go back in time and do it again, there's an aspect of self-promotion actually that I think a lot of kids in the United States maybe don't realize for recruitment is you kind of actually have to promote yourself too. You should, if let's say I want to run track and field in college, what you should really do is you should it's really easy to find on the internet. You can get all the contact information of all the coaches and all the universities, and you can send them an email, and you can send them a message, and you can tell them like, hey, I'm so and so, I'm really interested in running track and field at your university, like, and they're going to want to know your times and like, how you're progressing, how you're improving. So it's one of those things that like you can always put yourself out there pretty easy. So that's what I recommend to anyone if anyone was listening or, knows someone who's, wants to run track and field in the United States and or be a runner, and I think it's just in general for life itself is, if you want something, you just get the contact, you got to find the contact information of the people who have the accessing the door open and just reach out to them and tell them, hey, I'm interested. So Michigan and Michigan State, they both found me naturally, but I probably could have ran track and field at a lot of other universities, universities that never found me if I had actually reached out to the coaches and actually told them I was interested in their program or told them, what my times were. I probably could have been recruited more than I actually was. So yeah, I got lucky that they found me, but I think if I was to tell any kid who wants to do college athletics in the United States, I'd tell them to be more proactive than I was.
Absolutely. I mean, that's interesting to hear. When you first said self-promotion, that's a big thing in volleyball, at least. During my time where volleyball was a less popular sport, I mean, it still is. We were told to reach out to coaches and we were told to send out our highlight tapes. So I was very curious if you were going to say that you guys sent out highlight tapes or time, but time makes a lot more sense because it's just clear cut. But with volleyball, for example, mind you, I decided to go club D1 instead of D1 because I didn't have the opportunity really to be a starter for D1. Didn't want to go to a smaller school. But I still remember the schools that I did visit for D2 and D3. I enjoyed my visit and I enjoyed seeing the campus. Did you have a school visit when it came to MSU or Michigan, or how did that look for you?
Yeah, I did. I naturally lived close to both universities, so I'd been both places multiple times, and I checked them out on my own time. But yeah, and then I also had a recruitment visit. So usually it was pretty simple with track and field. Like they just I just went and I met with the coaches and they showed me the facilities and I met some of the guys in the teams, try to get a vibe check if we were a good fit, culture wise, the coaches. That's kind of the biggest thing is you really want to have a good relationship with whatever coach. It's the same as like you want to have a good relationship with whatever boss you have. So it's just really getting a feel for those things and seeing if the programs are a good fit. But track and field's pretty simple. It's you check out the dorms, you check out the the different athletic availabilities for the university, and then you check out the track and the weight room. But yeah, just for me it was pretty simple. I just drove over to both universities and met with the team and the coaches.
How far? I mean, you mentioned you're right by Ann Arbor, but how far is University of Michigan and Michigan State from you?
Michigan State's about like an hour from me, and then University of Michigan's about 20 minutes.
I mean, the reason I went to the University of Illinois was due to the fact that I was still close enough to see my mom whenever I needed to, but I was far enough where she wouldn't bring me food every couple of days.
Yeah.
So not sure if that played into your decision making between MSU and Michigan, but that just made me chuckle a little bit. But did you stay for an overnight visit or was it a day visit for both of these universities?
Just a day visit for both of these universities.
Yeah.
I actually, for football, I got recruited for a couple of universities that I did overnight visits, but yeah, I was just so close for both those places that it's just easy to just drive over.
Did your football visits get a little rowdy, if you mind me asking?
Yeah, they did actually take me out to a party. That actually was a thing.
Same here. 17-year-old Marcin had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I don't know about 18-year-old Noah.
It's fun when you're at that age. It's so exciting. The first time you go to a college party, you're like, wow, this is just like the coolest thing ever. You
get to visit. I mean, in my terms, I got to visit the volleyball house. I got to see what the niche was. I got to see how the circle looked. It was a different world. It's cool stepping onto a campus in America because no, I don't. I mean, you know that I'm currently studying out in Poland, but there's no campus environment here. You know, I'm in a bigger city, and regardless of where you're at in Poland, it's not like what we think of when we think of university back at home, where you have a whole culture to the university, where you have everything super tight knit, where you have everything that you need practically all on campus outside of, potentially some groceries that are a little bit cheaper at Walmart or a Target where you need to get some like furniture. Here, you're in the city, you have some buildings that are all over the place, and you need to get there. So I remember my first visit of seeing an actual university was just an eye-opening experience, and it's something that I hope that more Polish individuals get to see because it's different. Long story short, but getting out of that field of reminiscing, um, I want to go into your first day at college or your first couple of weeks. How did it feel stepping on a campus? How did it feel knowing that you're a D1 athlete and you have, you know, some resources available to you that an average college student might not?
Yeah, it's interesting. There definitely were some resources that typical student didn't get. There were tutors that you could get um, that were helpful. There was like our own personal building as well. I found some of the resources actually. It's interesting. They're really helpful, but they're really meant, in the United States. The resources, they're really just meant to keep you eligible. So basically, the way college athletics work is if your grades in university aren't up to standard, if you're failing classes, they'll make you ineligible to compete, and you won't be able to play the sport. So you have to meet a certain GPA threshold, a certain academic standard to be able to compete. And so, yeah, there's other students they help with. You can book a tutor, and they can help with some of your classes. Um, I found for me, I was doing engineering, that they didn't really have a lot of great tutors, and the university already had resources for all the students that were actually better than some of the student athlete resources. So I would say for me, I wouldn't say I got really much special treatment, but they're definitely, I think, for the sports in America, like football or basketball, where the sports that bring in a lot of money for the university because there's a huge fan base around them. I think those athletes can get a little bit of extra special treatment. But I think for the most part, I felt like a pretty regular college student. I just happened to spend extra time running, and competing. But it was really cool. I'd say one of the perks I really liked was Michigan State was sponsored by Nike, so we got tons of free clothing, like tons of free Michigan State Nike clothing. We got backpacks, and it was almost kind of like it was like a fun little status signal. Like there was an athlete backpack, all the athletes had them, and so you could always tell on campus who was an athlete.
100%.
So I think that was always a lot of fun. So there were some perks, and I think it was also very like being an athlete at a big university like Michigan State or one like Illinois. Um, it's people know you're really at the top of your sport to be competing for these universities, and so there's always like a respect factor that you would get. If you told people, "Hey, I'm an athlete at this university," people knew you were really really good at what you did, and there was always a lot of respect around it. So I think that was probably one of um, the cooler aspects for sure.
100%. I mean, if I don't know if this statistic is still correct because I read it a little bit ago, but I'm pretty sure there's over 18 million runners that compete, that register for 5Ks, for whatever it may be, a marathon. And obviously, there's a bigger culture to running within itself. So I'm assuming in America, thinking of anybody that runs for leisure compared to any kind of competitive aspect, you got, let's say, 30 million people out there, and I'm pretty sure there's 170,000 student athletes in total in the NCAA, which is both male and female. So you take that and you take it to the breakdown of the 30 million, you're really competing at the top tier.
Yeah, definitely.
But you talked about the balance of sports and academia. Was there a bigger push on your training, would you say, from your training staff, or did they also focus on making sure that you remained eligible?
Yeah, I'd say there's just more focus on athletic. I didn't have a problem with eligibility. I think if I did though, they would definitely step in and talk about it. But yeah, I could talk a little bit about like some of the kind of training we did. It was definitely a big step up from high school to college. So my coach was, her name was Yolanda Johnson, and she ran track at University of Colorado Boulder, and she also competed in the Olympic trials. She was a hurdler as well. So yeah, she was a tough woman, and she trained us like very, very hard, focused a lot on like sprinting endurance. So like a typical training would be, for example, if we were going to do like 100-meter sprints, we would do like 20 100-meter sprints. So you'd sprint 100 meters, you'd rest for like 30 seconds, you'd sprint 100 meters, rest for 30 seconds. And you're doing this with like a lot of other fast people around you. People who are, some of my teammates, were Olympians. So like, it wore you down. Like she would run us basically into the dirt, for lack of a better terms. So yeah, even as a sprinter, there's sprinting endurance where we would sprint as hard as we can, rest for a few seconds, and then go again, and rest for a few seconds, and then go again. And doing it again and again at a high pace, it pushes your body in the same way running 10 miles can push your body, but it's a different type of endurance. But she would really focus on that, and yeah, the training was tough. I'll never be in that good of shape again. I can tell you that.
You'll never be what? I'm sorry, I missed.
I'll never be able to train like that again.
I mean, I completely understand that. I guess you could call it collegiate career in volleyball. I definitely had better knees. I don't know what muscles, what joints are most critical to running, but I'm assuming the older you get, the worse they feel. Long story short. But you mentioned your training regimen. Was it like that from day one, or did that regimen evolve over time?
Yeah, it was pretty from day one.
Yikes.
Yeah, yeah, she worked us hard. So we had practice 5 times a week, and then in season, obviously, we'd have meets on the weekends. But typically, it'd be like classes from like morning, so like 8 or 9 in the morning to like 2 p.m. We'd have classes, and then I'd go over to the training facility. I'd do like some warm up. I'd do some stretching. That was one thing we had. We had trainers. We had really nice facilities. And so that'd be like an hour before practice, and then practice would probably be about 2 hours, and then there'd be about an hour after practice of in the training room to kind of help like wind down. So it'd be about like 4 hours, I would say, of my time.
Daily?
Monday through Friday. So that's about 20 hours. And then, yeah, and then if we like, so probably like, it was probably like a 20-hour a week commitment. And then if we, obviously we might have a meet in the weekend or something, and take up your weekend as well. And then it's obviously travel time back and forth. So I'd say it's about a 20 to 30 hour a week commitment to do
So
tracking.
You basically had a part-time job, you could say.
Yeah, it was almost like it's a part-time job. Um, but your life definitely revolved around it, because the typical college student, typical 19-year-old guy or girl, in college, could maybe on a Wednesday stay out late with their friends. But when you're an athlete, you want to get good sleep because, you got practice tomorrow. So you were a little bit more limited in terms of your ability to party, you know, as much as the typical, college kid in the United States. So definitely range you in a little bit, especially track and field, because you have to. I mean, you do not want to be drinking before, a day of just running your butt off. It'll destroy you. So versus if you played like football or something, people could kind of get away with it a little more. But no, when you're in season for track and field, you definitely be pretty ready.
Apologize for the technical difficulties right there. That's just something we're going to encounter in the 21st century still, because as we know, technology is not perfect. But last thing we talked about was sort of the sacrifices you had to um, endure throughout your collegiate career in order to be a D1 athlete. What motivated you to keep competing at that D1 level when you had friends or peers, you know, going out and having some fun at MSU? I mean, I've gotten to see MSU itself, and I know there's fun functions to go to.
Yeah, it's a good question. And yeah, I mean, to be honest, those fun functions, did actually influence me for sure. So I ran track and field for 2 years, and then I did leave. But I actually, part of it was, I did kind of want to be a normal student a little bit, but part of it was also my second year. I was running into a lot of injuries. I was struggling with my hamstring, and I kept pulling my hamstring over and over again. So um, yeah, I think for me, I just kind of got to a point where I was like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to the Olympics. I think that was kind of thing where I was like, I'm not going to the Olympics. I'm going to spend my last 2 years of college focused on school and friends. So yeah, so I ran for 2 years, and then after that, went back to being a normal student. But some of my friends from the track and field team I still keep in touch with, they did go on to compete in the Olympic trials, become professional track and field athletes, which is a path that people take. They still do it today. So, but I think for me, I realized after a couple of years that, um, you know, the payoff was no longer there. But I'm really grateful for the friends that I made and the experience of competing. And I grew up a Michigan State fan. Um, both my parents went to Michigan State, so I grew up going to the football games and the basketball games and enjoyed the spirit. So being able to wear the Michigan State jersey was a really cool experience for me and something that I, always look back on super fondly.
You brought up so many good topics right there. The most prominent one for me right here that has the largest difference with America compared to Poland is school pride. Being, Michigan State, your emblem, your mascot was the Spartan. What did it
Yeah.
mean to wear the letters, the colors, the logo of MSU and know that you're representing the school itself? Because I feel like that's something that is actually not a thing in Poland at all.
Yeah, it was just it was the absolute coolest. You grew up, watching athletes on TV, and as a kid, you mentioned the rivalry between Michigan State and Michigan. It was almost like an identity thing growing up in Michigan. It was either like you were Team Michigan State or you were Team Michigan, and every year, all the kids would talk, talk crap to each other, and about how the teams are doing and who was better than who, and there's always this rivalry and this competition. So it was like an opportunity to be a part of that. So I think it's cool. You get to be a part of something. You get to represent something. There's a lot of identity. There's a lot of pride. Like I'm proud to be a Michigan State Spartan. It's a part of my identity. And yeah, and I think I think you mentioned it is different than the rest of the world. It's a very, I think, uniquely American thing to have your identity tied into the university that you went to. Um, the way it is at a lot of big universities in the United States. So yeah, there's a huge pride around it, and I'm very proud to be a Spartan. Very proud to go to the Michigan State University, and I was really proud to compete and run track for Michigan State University.
Hold on, what is it? It's go green,
Yep, go green, go white.
go white. For us, it's ILLINI, baby.
Yeah,
I bet you a lot
we
of
we had a great time. We went to a basketball game, Michigan State versus the Illini. You guys beat us that day, and I got a lot of crap talked to me.
you got to see my school. I got to see MSU a couple times, but I'm still coming back to see it with you, man. I'm checking it out whenever I'm back in the States. I hope you enjoyed your visit out there, though.
I did.
Also, so before, I mean, not even trying to go the March Madness route right now because, I'm proud of us. I was hoping you guys would beat UNC. That was looking like a good match until it wasn't.
Yeah.
Uh, but outside of the identity within the school of being a Spartan during your collegiate career, um, is there any professional guidance that you guys get or networking opportunities of being a Spartan? How has that identity translated to your professional career, is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, it's definitely had a transition. There's definitely been multiple times where, yeah, you connect with coworkers. I mean, there's a huge alumni network. Michigan State University has about 50,000 students at a given time. So, yeah, there's like a million Spartan alumni all around the world, working in all different kinds of fields and corporations. So, there's always that connection back to East Lansing, Michigan. And I feel like wherever I am in the world, I will see a Spartan logo. I will see, I've traveled many places and seen it. And there's always that connection back home. So, yeah, I think I can't say I've ever gotten like a job because of it necessarily, but I think the degree is respected. It's a well-known university, and yeah, I've definitely felt like I've built a really good community because of it, and I feel good that if I go anywhere in the world, um, I can actually leverage that community to potentially meet people, just based on that connection. Um, so yeah, that's probably been the coolest thing. It's more just the personal fulfillment of the connections it's brought me has been really special.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't necessarily need those connections because you have an outstanding personality with a very extroverted um, persona, long story short, but definitely plays a role into your capabilities as a professional. Oh my gosh. I thought I had everything on Do Not Disturb, man. That's what happens, technology still. But kind of reverting back into um, some things that you just mentioned. You mentioned that the end of your career uh, was due to the fact that you had lingering injuries, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
We talked a little bit about resources briefly. What kind of resources were available to you when it came to your training staff?
Yeah, so there were a few different things available. So there was a team of trainers. There's probably like 6 or 7 um, athletic training staff, and then so we have a couple of athletic training facilities. And what we were in there, so you had things like hot tubs. You had things like a big ice baths. You had things like heating pads, cooling pads. We would have electrostatic kind of therapy where they would run like electrodes, run a current through you that help with reducing inflammation. Cup therapy, they would have different, equipment for rehab. They would have, and this is of course all free to you to use and access. Um, just nutrition. They had nutritionists. Obviously training weight facilities. They would have, water treadmills. That was pretty cool one. They had all, I mean, really the top stuff, you would ever need. Cause it's, you're training future professional athletes, you're training future Olympians in these facilities. So yeah, just to get to be able to use the best of the best, was really cool, and definitely a privilege.
That's crazy. I mean, I spoke about this in a previous episode with my buddy Justin. Long story short, but in Poland, if I had, for example, I had a almost dislocated my finger. If you could see it right now, um, I didn't have any trainer, even though I'm playing for my school. I just had to go to the public hospital where I wait. Y'all good? Noah?
Oh, you cut out a little bit.
What's the last thing you heard?
I can't remember. You cut out like 20 seconds ago.
um, so you were talking.
We talked about the training facilities and what they provided.
Absolutely. Let's do a little pause. So if anything, my buddy could cut this out. And then I'm gonna go into my not next segment, but the question that I was the word my answer, my reply.
Okay.
Love technology.
We're making it work.
So it's interesting hearing about how you had 6 individuals readily available to you at all times because, my experience out here in Poland, at least, as an athlete that's performing for his school, focused around the fact that in case of an emergency, in case of an injury, whatever it may be, I had to go to the public hospital where I had to wait 4 hours to, for example, get my finger taken, looked at when I thought I dislocated it, for example. That staff was available to you whenever you needed them, or did you need to go to the coach, or how did that look for you?
Yeah, just whenever they were always available. I mean, for the hours that they worked, the times they worked, it was usually before or after practice. So yeah, I mean, you usually work with someone one on one. Maybe if the training, maybe if it was a little bit filled that day, you'd have to wait a second to work with someone. But yeah, it was pretty accessible. They had tons of resources, and yeah, I mean they had a whole staff, and that was just for the track program, and we shared our athletic facility, our athletic trainers with I think also with like the tennis players and the soccer players, and I think tennis, soccer, maybe rowing, maybe a couple other sports, and then I think the basketball team had their own trainers, and then I think the football team had their own as well.
Obviously.
So I definitely had a what?
I said obviously right there, thinking about the money. And
Yeah.
But I know that you got a little bit of a time crunch today, so I want to kind of wrap this up and talk a little bit more about your team. Can you talk about the team in general and how important it was to have a camaraderie and how important that camaraderie was in terms of your overall success?
Yeah, the camaraderie was huge. I mean, you just can't. Track's an individual sport, but you can never train the way we train by yourself. You need those people to push you. So yeah, there's a huge camaraderie. Outside of practice, we would hang out afterwards. We would hang out on the weekends. Those were your friends too. They were your first friends at the university. When you move to a new city, they're the first people you meet. So yeah, that was huge.
How big was the team, if you mind me asking?
Team was probably, for the sprinting squad, it was probably like 20 guys, 20 girls. There was probably like 40 long distance runners, guys, and 40 girls. I mean, you probably had about 120 between guys and girls, because it was kind of combined in a way. We're kind of like there's guys and girls teams where you kind of all work together. So, and yeah, it's good. I mean, so you're probably about 120 people, I would say.
Jesus,
So
huge.
it was definitely a good size.
Gosh, you really you didn't have to meet anybody outside of your track and field team if you didn't want to, but knowing your personality, I know that you did. But in America, there's a large emphasis, like we mentioned, when it comes to culture, when it comes to traditions. Did your team hold any traditions before track meets, practices, whatever it may be?
Yeah, we didn't really have a lot of traditions, to be honest. So no. But yeah, we didn't really have a lot of traditions. There's no superstitions. I have nothing good to say about that one.
Gotcha.
I wish we did. That'd be cool.
Appreciate the sheer honesty with that. But, now you went through your 2 years in track and field, you're a graduate, you're right now looking at your professional career. How did that transition from being a D1 athlete, being at MSU, to starting your professional career look like? Was there any aspects from your D1 training that you think contributed to your success in your professional career?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely the work ethic. When you're an athlete, you have to balance school and you have to balance athletics. So you have to, that finding that balance is really important. So yeah, balancing those two things, that was definitely the biggest thing. But I think it was always a good thing to put on the resume. I think people knew from that experience that you were a hard worker. So I think that was helpful with, obviously getting that first job is always the toughest, after university. And I think there was a positive transition. And I think, but it's really just, it's just mentality, like, do you have the mentality to try and be the best that you can be at what you're doing? And I think that can apply to track and field, that can apply to, schoolwork, that can apply to your professional career too. So I think it really does, cross. It's just the mentality can fit into anywhere. So yeah, I definitely do think that the mentality of being an athlete has definitely helped me in other areas besides just athletics.
Absolutely. I mean, I had a lot of coaches that were able to teach me little life lessons that didn't only translate to the game of volleyball, but also translated to life itself. For example, life is wavy. You're gonna have peaks, you're gonna have lows. You want to make sure you keep it as steady and you want to have as many peaks as possible, right? That's kind of the way that the ebbs and flows of volleyball look, where you're gonna have your mistakes that you make, because volleyball is a game of mistakes, and then you're going to have your highs of getting a great kill. But overall, you want to keep your team going steady, and you want to make sure you reach as many highs with trying to have as little lows as possible, right? Did your coaching staff throughout your collegiate career only focus on your physical development, or did they instill any mental practices that you would say you still use today?
Yeah, mental practices. I mean, I think the visualization practice I mentioned earlier was pretty good. I think just visualizing how you want to execute something. I think that could apply to maybe like a big presentation. I think there were some studies that kind of showed that like pre-visualization can help with execution. So I think that was a really good exercise. I'd say that's probably the biggest one as far as like mental prep.
Yeah, other than that, just like sheer determination. I mean, just not, in a tough workout, just not quitting, when things get tough. And I think you mentioned camaraderie. I think it's a lot easier to not quit when you've got people going through something with you. So I think if you want to do anything tough in life and you want to get better, I think having great people around you is the best way to accomplish it. So um, yeah, that's definitely what I would recommend.
Appreciate that. Last question before we get into this little impromptu segment, you could say volleyball and basketball, two sports that I heavily have been involved with and followed throughout my whole life, have evolved a ton throughout, my life. Has running evolved, or would you say the technology of running has evolved within running?
Yeah, I think it's evolved. Not, I mean, obviously, I think people are getting more aware of like the proper technique for running. So it'd probably be pretty hard to talk about this over a call, but there is, that's something that you can get better at. Your running form is really important. I think for me, that's definitely one thing I pay attention to a lot that other people probably don't pay attention to is when I watch people run. Like I actually look at their form and like how their foot is striking ground and how their arms are moving. You can actually improve your running quite a bit just by proper running form, and you can get a lot of injuries too from running without good running form. So the biggest thing is like if you strike when you run, you want to run on the balls of your feet first. And some people they'll strike their heel before the balls of their foot, and that creates a lot of downward pressure onto your knees. So like stuff like that, I think that's more biomechanical. That's good to know. I think people get better and better at paying attention to those things, and I'm sure the top athletes in the world have trainers that get really in depth with them on it. I think track spikes have made a lot of improvements. Obviously, if you look back to like when running really became a big sport, probably in like the 60s, probably the 70s, like Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, he really caught the wave of when running used to be kind of weird. Like it used to be kind of weird to go for a run. No one did that, and it started to become a thing. Like jogging and running and track became more of a sport. And Nike got that's how Nike started. Was Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, was a track athlete at the University of Oregon, and he and his track coach were business partners. And the track coach would he would create his own track spikes, and he would practice with different materials, and he would try to create his own stuff. And then they would go over to Japan and China and work with the manufacturers to make it. So I'd say that's probably where all the technology is. There's in the spikes, and then I'm sure you can get into depth like the quality of the track of what you run on. There's a big difference. That's one thing as a track runner is like when you step onto a really nice track with like kind of a nice firm but soft running material, you could kind of tell when you're going to have your best race based on the quality of the track. Sometimes you'd step on a track and it'd be kind of like hard and not a good track, and you kind of knew it was going to be kind of crap. So there's definitely like little things that can move the needle for sure. So yeah.
Last question, actually. What is the most memorable meet that you ever had or experience that you had throughout your career in track and field at MSU?
Most memorable meet that I had, probably the meet where it was the home meet. So we hosted a meet, and it was really cool because they would do it the same day as the spring football game. So track and field's cool, but people would come out to a meet, but way more people come out to a football game. But so what they would do is they would host the meet the same day as the spring football game, and they would have it going on so people could come watch the meet before they go watch the spring football game. So that day, like the stadium's packed, it's like full of people watching. My family and friends were there. I think that was cool because they got to see me run. Because otherwise, I was traveling to different states or different universities. So I think that was definitely the best one for sure. Um, Second most memorable meet was actually in high school. This will be the bad story. Is I was in the state final, and I was in the lead halfway through the race for the 300-meter hurdles, and I pulled my hamstring. and the guy who ended up winning broke the state record. So that was kind of brutal. I was on pace to break the state record, and I pulled my hamstring. I was pretty upset about that. But my college career was good, and yeah, I mentioned the hamstring issues. It's that's one of the hard things about these sports is you push your body to the physical limit, so you can get these kind of injuries that, maybe in other sports you can get away with, like let's say you have a little bit of an injury in volleyball or basketball. You can kind of nurse it. You don't have to be at 100%. You can play really well at 80%. Everyone knows like the story of like the athlete, who like rolls their ankle, or like busts their knee and plays through it in like football or basketball. But in track, like if you hurt yourself, like you're not going 100%, like you're just going to lose. So like it's done. So that's the hard part is you got to get your body in tip top shape. So that's when I realized I was chronically pulling my hamstring, I was struggling. That's when I decided to call it quits. But yeah, anyways.
Yeah, my back has been injured so many times, and let alone I just keep saying that I'm going to be playing until I sit in a wheelchair, which, cross my fingers, never happens. But completely agree with you. I didn't even think about it, but outside of the fact that you got to give it 100%, you need to make sure that your body's at 100% when it comes to running. Unlike, I mean, for us Americans, at least, the most notable story that I could think of right now is Pat Mahomes before the repeat when he injured his ankle back in 2023, last year, right? And still won the Super Bowl.
That's a perfect example. You can rely on your other traits. You kind of can do that in sports like football for sure.
Absolutely. Well, there's 100 other questions I could ask you about team chemistry, whatever it may be, your regimens, but I'm just going to leave it at one final question because whoever's listening may not know this or will not know this, but my friend Noah has been to Poland when he was extremely young, but hasn't visited since then, and that will change shortly. But no, what are the first three words that come into your mind when you hear the word Poland?
Pierogi. I think of Warsaw comes to mind second. I think
Good city.
Yeah. I think kind people. I live in Chicago, so Marcin. Marcin was incredibly warm from the moment I met him, and there's a big Polish community. You know what? The word I'll use pride. There's a big Polish community in Chicago, and one thing I've noticed is everyone has a lot of pride in their Polish heritage, and I think that's really special. I think everyone should feel that. So I think there was a strong sense of community that was pretty unique, especially in the United States, where a lot of European or white people in the United States, they kind of lose that heritage, kind of mix into American culture. But I feel like Polish people have a lot of pride and they really hold on to it. So I thought that's pretty cool. And what would be a good third thing? I'll just be honest. Like, I feel like a lot of times I learn about Poland is through history, like World War II, and like I think the country went through a lot. So I would say resilient. When I read through history, I mean, there was a lot that I've just read about. So I would say, resilient would be the impression that I get from Polish people. So.
That's beautiful. I mean, a lot of our pride comes from our resiliency. I mean, we've been taken off of maps twice so far, and then we've maintained our heritage, our culture, and we've made it back up here. And right now, we're building our infrastructure, we're building everything. We're just trying to become the best version of ourselves. So those are some wise observations you had right there. But either way, appreciated you coming out here, explaining your experience, talking a little bit more in depth on what it means to be a track and field athlete in America. And as I told you, you have the invite to come out to Poland, and you definitely have the invite for a part 2, because I can just keep asking you questions. Long story short.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun. And yeah, I'd absolutely love to do a part 2. So we'll do it.
With that, we'll catch you on our next episode. Once again, this conversation was held with my good friend, Noah, ex-D1 runner from Michigan State University. One more time, it's been a pleasure having you.